Today we are going to talk about one of the most important things you need to research if you want to be a pilot, and that is your flight training. Which school should you go to? How much will it cost? How long is it going to take? What's the weather like at that flight school? Are you going to be able to train most days, or are you going to have a whole winter where you're unable to train? We're going to talk about all that and more. First, I want to talk about the different types of flight training. You can either train under Part 61 or Part 141. Part 61 is what I did all of my training at. Part 141 honestly wasn't as popular 20 years ago when I went through training. Part 61 is a more relaxed way of training. There's still all the FAR requirements, everything that you have to know how to do to get your license, but how you get there is up to you and your flight instructor or the flight school. Part 141 has a more precise syllabus that needs to be followed, and that syllabus is approved by the FAA. There are lessons built in where if you need a little bit more flight training doing landings or steep turns or whatever it is, you can have some extra flight training lessons, but it is a more precise syllabus. The nice thing about Part 141 is you don't have to have as many hours to get your license. Now, if you want to really see like the side-by-side breakdown, you're just going to have to go into the different parts of the FARs, or you could probably just Google it. I'm sure someone's got like nice charts where it's like pros and cons of 61, pros and cons of Part 141. But the main thing is Part 141 is a syllabus approved by the FAA. Part 61 is not. You just have to meet the requirements listed in FAR Part 61. If your goal is to be an airline pilot, I would maybe recommend a Part 141 flight school. If your goal is just to get a license, fly around for fun, buy your own airplane, do your own thing, I would recommend Part 60. There are a lot of different flight schools. We're talking about there are airlines like Delta. I know American has one where you can go through their academies, and it's like a nice little stepping stone to get to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, so that you can get hired at that major airline. So that's one thing to look into. There's also flight schools that are associated with degrees to where you end up with all of your licenses. You also end up with a bachelor's degree. That's what I did. And then there's also flight schools where it's just the flight school. There's no degree attached to it. I do highly recommend you getting a degree. Up until post-COVID, it was almost impossible to get hired at a major airline if you did not have a degree. Now, because they need pilots so much right now, I don't know how long that's going to last. They are starting to waive the requirement. However, it is still competitive. So if you want to kind of get your foot in the game better and have a better guarantee for an interview, I recommend getting a degree. The next thing you'll want to do is just get a whole list of flight schools, maybe, 5 to 10 flight schools that you are interested in, and then try to narrow it down. And honestly, just get on Google and do a search. There are so many flight schools, it would be impossible for me to recommend just one flight school to go to because we are all so different. Like for me, like I said, I went through Utah Valley University, and so I did the degree program while I was doing my flight training. That worked for me and my goals because I was also able to get financial aid, I was able to get some scholarships, and I really wanted that degree while I was getting my flight training. So that worked for me. But for some people, that's not what they want. Some people might want an accelerated flight training program like ATP. Get your list, narrow it down to, I would say, 2 to 3 flight schools that you are interested in going to, and then go to the flight school. Contact them. Set up an appointment to get a whole tour of the facility, ask tons of questions, and if you can, maybe after the tour is over or before, try to speak with some of the people who are going through that program right now and see if they enjoy it. Maybe even ask some of the things that are negative, because every flight school is going to have positive and negative things. Just try to get a really good feel for what it is this flight school, like what this flight school is going to give you. A few of the questions I would highly recommend asking, and I'm sure they'll talk about this if you get a tour of the facility, is the cost of flight training. And it'd be nice to have a breakdown of what it is per hour, like how much are you paying for the aircraft and the flight instructor, and then how long does it usually take for people to get their private pilot's license? What does that usually cost? And then what does it cost to get everything through your CFI? And once they give you that number, I would say add thousands of dollars to it, probably $5 or $6 grand at a minimum, because sometimes things just take longer than planned. Maybe you were going to get, thought you were going to take your commercial check ride right at 250 hours, but you got so delayed and now you need more training, just whatever it is. I found in my experience that the cost of the flight school, like ballparked for me, I always spent at least $1,000 more on every rating. And I'm not saying you're going to, but it's kind of nice to have that figure, that money figure in mind so that you don't run out of money before your ratings are completed. So the cost is a big thing. The next one you want to ask yourself, or maybe talk to the flight school about, is how do students pay for this? Can you get loans from banks, or can you pay as you go? Do you have a rich uncle? I didn't, but that would have been super nice. Are you able to get financial aid, like federal Pell Grant, federal loans? I'm not sure what they're called anymore. And I went through so long ago, I'm not sure how the programs are set up now, but like you need to talk about that, because you don't want to get a few months into your training and then completely run out of money. That did happen to me and it was a pain. That's a story for another day. How are you going to pay for it? The other thing that you'll want to ask them is like, what is the weather like most of the year? Are you going to be able to fly most days, or is there going to be a huge chunk of the year where it's almost impossible to do flight training? I did mine in Utah and it worked out pretty well. Like the month of January was really the only month that was really tricky to fly, because every January we had this crazy inversion, which for some odd reason we did not have this last year. So as a student, it was really hard. But when I started realizing that, like, okay, January is just one month, it's really hard to fly, I really buckled down and started studying for the check rides as far as all the ground portion goes. If there's just 1 month, you can make it productive. If you're looking at flying somewhere where they're like, yeah, we've got like 3 or 4 good months of flight training, that's probably not somewhere you want to get your flight training at, because you don't want to have to stop. I was always super jealous of the people that got to go do their flight training in Arizona. And I could have gone there. I don't know, in my mind it was like, I'm already in this program, I'm going to finish it out. But I had friends that went to Arizona and they got to flight train every day. Granted, the summers were awful for them because they had to get up at like 4 and 5 a.m. to go flying. But they could fly pretty much every day of the week. Another thing you'll want to ask the flight school is, how far away are the practice areas? When you are doing your flight training, obviously you're going to have days where you're staying close to the airport and you just practice takeoffs and landings. But in order to get a license, you have to demonstrate a whole bunch of maneuvers, like demonstrate that you can do them. And usually flight schools have specific areas where you fly to, and then you have this little area that you can do your maneuvering at. When I flew out of Provo Airport, and the practice areas were 5 minutes away. Like, I complained if we had a further practice area that was like a 10 or 15 minute flight. I did a little bit of flight instructing out of Seattle. It was actually the Boeing field after I had my first son. And that practice area was a bit of a ways away. And so my student was spending probably 15 minutes just to get to the practice area, because you have to get away from all of the other traffic, like commercial traffic. And so that was kind of a pain. And as a flight instructor, I made that time useful for my students. I don't know if every flight instructor would be that way. So just ask them, how close are the practice areas, just so you kind of have an idea in your mind of how much time you'll be paying for that you maybe won't be practicing maneuvers for. The other thing you'll want to ask is regarding the maintenance of the airplanes. Do they have their own mechanics that are there all the time? So if you have something little that comes up, the mechanics, can they come out immediately and look at it so that you can get on your way? Or is it more of a contract maintenance situation? The contract maintenance is a little bit more challenging because they might not be able to just be there like that. The maintenance of the airplanes was very important to me, which is part of the reason I did choose the program at UVU and why I stayed through the whole thing. This is not a plug for them. It's just to give you my experience. But they had mechanics that were on staff. They were very good. I knew most of them. I would go and chat with them all the time. And so I felt safe in those airplanes. I didn't want to be having an engine failure at 300 feet after takeoff and landing in the lake. So just ask about the maintenance. The other thing you'll want to ask is if you are able to get all of your single and your multi-engine ratings there. There are actually some flight schools, I would hope that they're rare nowadays, that don't have any multi-airplanes, like multi-engine airplanes. They only have single engine. So that's kind of a pain, because then you'd only be able to get up to a specific point in your training, and then you'd have to go somewhere else to get your multi-engine training. You do want to get multi-engine training, especially, well, if you're just trying to do it on your own for fun, you don't need to. But if you're going to try to go to the airlines or corporate aviation or something like that, at some point in your career, you're going to need multi-engine time. So ask if the flight school has airplanes for single and multi-engine. The other thing you'll want to look into is if there is a wait list to start your flight training, or if they have enough flight instructors that you can just get in and get started right away. I know especially since post-COVID, we've kind of had a shortage of flight instructors too, because everyone's getting hired on by the airlines. It's just creating this ripple effect. So a lot of flight schools now may have a waiting list to even be, instructors might be a little bit bogged down, like they might not have enough time to commit to you. So just ask. When you start your flight training, you'll want to fly at least 3 days a week, but maybe you're more motivated and you just want to get done faster. Maybe you can bump it up to 5. See if the flight school that you want to go to has the availability of flight instructors to help you reach your goals. I always just did 3 days a week at a minimum. Some of my friends, though, wanted to train 4 or 5 days a week. So just whatever your goal is, talk to your flight school about that so you can get a good idea of which program is going to be best for you. The last question that I recommend, and I'm sure there's a million more, but the last question I recommend you asking the flight school is, how long does it usually take to go from start to finish? That was important to me. I didn't want to be through one of those programs where it was start to finish in a year, because I knew that those would, and some people love them. I just didn't want to have to be all day, every day, winter, summer, spring, just at the flight school. I wanted to make sure I was still living my life too. And so the flight school that I went to, they were honest about it up front. They said, this is a 3 to 4 year program. You do your flight training while you do your degree. And because that's already so much going on, like I didn't really have the time to fly more than 3 days a week. So that worked really well for me. I was able to get my degree and then all of my licenses through commercial in 3 years. And I took every summer off. Like I was single and I wanted to date and have fun and go on cool trips. So it took me 3 years. And then after I graduated, I worked on my CFI. And then in '07, so almost a year after I graduated, then I started flight instructing. And that was a perfect timeline for me. But you may not be like me. So find something that works for you and your goals. That's it for today. I just want to make sure that you guys understand that choosing a flight school is a big decision. So don't just find the first flight school and just go there. Just research it out and make a good decision with what works for you and your goals. This is your life. So pick a flight school that's going to work for you. If you have any questions, please hit me up in the comments below. I don't know everything, but I do know a lot. Just kidding. I'll see you guys next time.